Good morning, Peter.
Yeah, good morning.
How are you?
I'm well. I spent a little bit of time getting wood together to put in the furnace because we've got snow today, and it's actually a nice ritual in the morning.
Is it? Where is snow? Where are you in the
Well,
world?
I live on an island uh, off the coast of Vancouver Island, which is on the west side of Canada,
Hmm.
um, and it's the pretty much about as southwest as you can go in Canada, which which means that we are basically the Arizona of Canada. People always call it the Northwest, but that's from an American orientation. I always like to tease and say, well, we live in the Southwest. But anyway, I live on an island called Salt Spring Island, which is an island off the coast of the larger Vancouver Island. We live in a very rural situation. I'm looking out my window right now, and on the other side of all the snow that I'm seeing, there's nothing but forest. There's cedar and pine and fir and maple and wonderful kind of forest trees, and we can walk in there. And then just to the west of that, we also live on a lake.
Right.
It's a very, it's a very lovely rural situation
Wow.
on an island that is quite unusual because it's the island is filled with artists, yogis, writers. There are more than 100 published writers on this island. There are yogis and yoga teachers. There's more than one yoga center here. Uh, and we have of course, our Buddhist, Zen Buddhist community here, but there's also Tibetan Buddhist practice here. So it's a very unusual place. And a lot of kind of like-minded people moved here starting pretty much in the 60s, but it really sort of took off more in the 80s and the population started to grow. And then there's the old island people whose families have been here a long, long time. Uh,
Well, it sounds amazing. I mean, we might get to how you get ended up, you being a published author and a Zen Buddhist on an island with so many like-minded people. That sounds amazing. I hope we get there.
Sometimes you stumble into the exact right ice cream store and you get the flavor of your choice. And that's what happened.
I'm literally packing my bags now.
Okay, good. Well,
Have you got a spare room?
we do.
I'll be over. No, seriously, thank you for joining. I appreciate you taking time out of your morning. This is my little podcast called Still Points, where I talk to people who I'm deeply inspired by, and I've been deeply inspired by your work over the last only for about 6 months, but as you'll see, there's links that go back. So I appreciate you being here. The first question I really like to ask is when did contemplative practice move you enough to say, this is how I'm going to live my life now? I'm going to move this way. I'm not, this is the direction I'm going.
That's an interesting question, and it's a good question. Um, I'm going to take it way before I ever had an idea that there was something called contemplative practice. Um, when I was born, I was ill. I was a preemie, etc. I was, in an incubator for a long time, in forced isolation, and I was sick for quite a few years, and in bed a lot. And my life, I wasn't only in bed, but my memory of that time was that I spent a lot of time in my room with the lights dimmed, listening to music on the radio, and when I was old enough, reading books. And I learned that listening to music uh, and reading books and just sort of being in that drowsy place that you get when you're young felt like a kind of safe refuge for me. And so I was sort of, talk about stumbling into the ice cream store. My life stumbled me forward into an opportunity to be alone and to be with myself, to have my own thoughts, Sometimes I had very high fevers, 105 Fahrenheit plus, and would hallucinate and see all these strange kind of weird things. But I learned to love that sense of quiet inside of myself. I was not interrupted at all. Then I got healthy when I was around 8, and I lived a sort of fairly ordinary life. But some part of me always would go home from the rigors of being a child. I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. The streets were sometimes pretty tough. And I would always go home, and my refuge would be to go into my room, close the door, pick up a book, or pick up my musical instruments. I played guitar, etc., and sing, and be with myself. That felt more like what I could recognize as me than almost anything else. When I was, as I got older, I realized that I couldn't figure out how I was going to take my place as a young man or as a man in the culture, because there didn't seem to be any place for me. There didn't seem to be a place for a sensitive male child to do the kinds of things I was talking about, spending time that way. Everybody else was really clearly going out there and really making their mark in the world. That's the last thing I had any interest in. So in 1967, I moved. I was 21 at the time. I was married. I moved to San Francisco right before the Summer of Love happened, so-called Summer of Love. And that was a wild time. It was an incredible time. And everybody was trading ideas and new things that they found. And one of the things that was being talked about was Buddhism, and Zen, Tibetan Buddhism. There were Zen teachers and there were other spiritual teachers around. And so all of a sudden, I realized, wait a minute, there's a whole world of people who were doing this thing called meditation, which I had never really thought about. I never thought what I was doing was meditating. I just thought I was reading my books or being alone, or, or playing music or listening to music. So I started to practice meditation in some way that I had figured out from books, or, I think some friends I lived with showed me some things. And it immediately felt like home. This is my home. This is my place of refuge. And what I want to say about refuge in that way is that it wasn't refuge away from the world. It simply was refuge in and of myself. It was a place where, I became my own hermitage, where I could simply land in me and be there. And it felt very good. And so I would say by the time I was in my early 20s, this seed was starting to grow. It had been, the ground was laid by my being a sick child and, sort of fragile and, a little different than the other boys. But now it was growing, and there was a culture saying, this is a good thing, check this out. So now the 60s culture was actually saying, this is viable. Look into it, which is one of the great treasures of that time. Because as you know, many people went that way. So I hope that makes a kind of coherent sense to you.
I mean, that sounds amazing. I think there's something really rich about just when you're really young, having to be on your own. What were you sick with, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it's curious because, first of all, I was born at 5 pounds, and then I went down to 3 pounds almost immediately. I was what was called a failure to thrive child. They didn't think I was going to live. But what seemed to have happened was that, this is what my mother told me, I was allergic to my own bacteria. So my own natural processes were making me sick.
Wow.
And there didn't seem to be much of a solution to it, but my immune system was challenged all the time. So if streptococcus came through, I would get it. If pneumonia came through, I would get it. No matter what came through, I got it. And so it kept me sick for 7 years.
Gosh. So you just literally had to be on your own.
Yeah. And I wasn't only on my own. But I was on my own an awful lot, and I was on my own in a way that felt quite fragile. And of course, my parents were worried. So there was a kind of anxiety about my existence that was in the room. I didn't realize that I was entering the age of anxiety. But there it was.
There's something about this this time, and I forget. Give me if I get it wrong, but like there's this anxiety that you're trying to working with, but you're finding solace in yourself. But
Right.
there's anxiety around life, and then there's that like, oh, what do I do with this now? I'm sensitive. You're obviously sensitive, and then suddenly you find this kindred spirit. The timing was perfect for you, wasn't it?
No, no, absolutely right. And I felt like I don't recognize the world I'm supposed to enter as a young man. But through being with myself in this, what you said, contemplative way, in this quieter way, and I was writing by then too, and I have to say that the act of writing was a refuge for me as well, and it remains one. I still go to it, all the time, basically. But while I couldn't recognize what place I was supposed to take in the world of men, because there didn't seem to be any men like me, I didn't know what to do. I did recognize something that felt profoundly true, and it was within myself.
Amazing. So it was like when this timing happened, and you realized, and you saw meditation, everything just went. It was like everything just went. There we go.
Yeah, suddenly there was a place.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know how when you're walking somewhere and you're looking for a place to sit down and there's just no place to sit down, and you finally find one and you sit down, what do you feel? You feel enormous relief.
Can you?
I felt like, yeah.
Have you got a timing? Have you got a moment when that landed?
I think, in thinking back to that time and age, I was a very anxious person, and quite confused about what to do, as I said. And I think that as I read more about Eastern spirituality, and specifically about Buddhism and Zen, because that's what really took me, and maybe I can come back to that in a minute, and began to meditate and do these kind of practices, I would say it slowly began to permeate my being. So if there is a moment, it's a moment made of many moments, and it's very long. And then, of course, as a contemplative yourself, perhaps you'll understand this. When one does have a practice, and there is a moment, that fleeting moment takes forever. So I came in it through the back door. But all along, I have to say, the message that was coming through me is there is a place for you to be. You can be, and you can be here, and you can be yourself here. It's okay. And until that, I really didn't know it was okay. I just had no idea what I was going to do, which, needless to say, created lots of anxiety.
Sure. I mean, again, talking about the summer of love, I'm just thinking like you could have gone another way, which is like smoke loads of dope, taken loads of LSD, done all that kind of thing. And I don't know if you did. I mean, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah,
you did it as well. Great.
Yeah, I did all of that.
But like, there's something really rich about ending up. How did it end up being Zen?
Well, it's. I have to laugh because I know the story. When I was an early teen, maybe around 12 years old or something like that, sick in bed again, someone gave me a record of a comedian named Shelley Berman, and he would do these routines where he would just sort of talk on the phone with fake people. But one day in the middle of in the middle of one of his comedy routines, he said to the audience, it was a live audience, down in Greenwich Village. He said, "We know the sound of two hands clapping, but what is the sound of one hand clapping?" And the whole audience laughed, and I laughed too, but I didn't know why I was laughing. And of course, this is Hakuin's famous koan, the sound of one hand clapping. So when I was 21, and then I forgot about it. When I was 21, I picked up a book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones in the Salvation Army thrift bookstore. And I started reading it, and lo and behold, there is what is the sound of one hand clapping. So I thought, wow, this isn't just a comedy routine. This is something that has something to do with Zen. So I started reading the book, and what I found was that I didn't understand anything about it because it was stories and koans and, all kinds of Zen stuff. I didn't have a clue, but no matter what I read, it made me laugh or it made me interested. So I kept reading, and I thought, I don't know what's going on here, but I understand something, but I don't know what it is I understand. But I know I understand something, but I have no words for it. And so, needless to say, that just brought me forward and said, I want to do this more. And then I learned to meditate, and then the whole picture started to blossom in some way. So in a way, it was humor and my curiosity about how is it that I understand what I don't understand, that really made me say, I like this Zen stuff. This is pretty good.
So what was the movement then?
And that was 55 years ago. I'm still doing it. I'm still laughing. And I still don't understand.
This is why I got you on. I want the answers, Peter, right now. I want them all. We're going to have a long chat. What was the movement then when you really decided, when you studied Zen and you said this is it, then what was the steps that you took?
It's very interesting. I was told at the time that there was a great Zen master in San Francisco who was Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who many, of course, million and more people know about him. His teachings was put in the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I was told that there was this really extraordinary Zen teacher in San Francisco, and I should go see him. But it was 1967, and I was 21. And I wanted nothing to do with anything institutional. And I wanted nothing to do with anything authoritative. I just wanted to read, study, practice, and write, and be left alone. And so this is so ironic because I think, as you know, I've ended up an authorized teacher in Suzuki Roshi's lineage. I did not go see him.
Oh, okay.
I stayed away. And I thought, it sounds good, that's really, really nice, but I didn't want, and it may have been a kind of foolishness on my part. Although I had a conversation with David Chadwick, who is Suzuki Roshi's archivist and was one of his original students. When I told him this story, he said to me, you may have been smarter than the rest of us. I said, I can't claim being smart, but I wanted to be alone. I think I didn't want the refuge I was creating for myself in the hermitage of my life to be interrupted by anything official. I needed space to move around. I needed not to be told, do this way or do this that way. I think it was part of being a young man. But I also think that, by then I was deeply into my life as a writer, as a young writer. I think it was my way of not constraining myself more than I felt was necessary, so that I could float and discover what it is I wanted to, what it was for me to discover. I shouldn't say wanted to discover, because I had no agenda to discover things, but I think it's something like that. I basically just wanted to be left alone. I mean, remember, I'm someone who spent a lot of time alone in his room. I wanted to be alone in my room, even though there was a great Zen master that I should go see.
Just around the corner.
Yeah, right there. I mean, it was 10 minutes away, or he was 10 minutes away. Sometimes I've studied his teaching so much over the last 50 years. Sometimes I think, gee, I really should have done that. But I also know that there's something in me that I call wander time. Wander time means I don't know where I'm going to go and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to be there wherever I go, and I'm going to do whatever I do actively and as completely as I can. But I need a lot of space and a lot of time to do that without any demands on me. And so in a way, that has really governed my life. I've stayed away from too many constrictions. If something feeds that wander time or nourishes that creative deep self, then it doesn't feel like a constraint. But if it diminishes it, then I made a decision at that early age. I'm not going to do that. I won't do that. If you asked me what it was I was nourishing, I couldn't tell you. But I could feel that the fit was too tight, and so I wouldn't do it. Now, of course, what that meant is that I've not been one of life's great money makers. I haven't gone off and, into the business world and done all of that stuff, because you have to be there every day from 8 to 5 or 10 or whatever people are doing now. But it was a very, very clear choice on my part. That life is not for me. This life where I can wander and I can nourish and I can be nourished and I can discover and explore, that's the life I want to live. And so that's what I do.
I mean, that's a really profound insight at such a young age.
I think, but I think I was helped to realize that by the culture that really at the time had no open doors for me.
But it sounds like, and this is something I'm just jumping on it sounds like you had a writing practice which was deeply personal anyway. So it's like you not only had like this new sense of reflection which you could really pour yourself into and reading, you also had an outlet for it.
Right.
And that sounds to me like someone who doesn't, it sounds to me like, that's almost like amazing, because at that age we're looking around going, I'm looking for teachers, someone to guide us. And you're going, no, I'm all right. I'm just going to do this. But it sounds like, again, I'd like you to lead into like your writing. You had a writing practice and that which turned into what you did, where you could actually just be with yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, we're either our own best or worst company, but and sometimes both.
Yes, sometimes.
But the American poet William Carlos Williams, who was a pediatrician for more than 50 years, I discovered his writing at a pretty young age. He said, importantly, the poet thinks with the poem. And that in itself is the profundity. The poet thinks with the poem, and that in itself, that act itself, the act of writing, is the profundity. It doesn't lead to a profundity. It doesn't get you anything. It's the doing of it. That really expresses the spirit that I felt when I was writing. I'm in this now. I'm doing this now. I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to do what I can. And so it was a hyper-focused, intense, laser-like practice of trying to locate what it is, that wanted to be said, and then how to say it, which is very difficult. It certainly was difficult for me. How do how do you make the invisible world visible in words? Because that's what, in speaking for myself, that's at least what, what poetry is doing. I mean, I walk in the woods and there's a soft, lovely breeze blowing through the trees, and I feel it on my arm, and suddenly, simply that sensation, right? That sensation becomes profound as my human experience. But it's not made of language. It's made of wind. How do I put wind into the heart and mind of somebody else through language when wind is not language at all, except its own vocabulary, right? That became my question. How do I make the ineffable world, the impermanent world, the invisible world manifest using A, B, C, D, E, F, G? How do I do that? And it led to I don't know if this is of interest at all, but it led to a very deep study for me, because when I would read poems that I really loved, I read them with only one question in mind, which is, how did they make me feel what I feel? It's got to be something about the way the words are here on the page, the words that are chosen, the words, in order, what the phrasing is like, if there's any musicality to it. But my question is, how did he do it? And so I took that study very seriously as part of my contemplative practice, because it's a little bit different than most readers. They just say, "Oh God, I felt so great," but they don't know how they got to feel great. I wanted to know, how do you create it? And I spent a lot of time, for example, with William Blake, I wanted to get some sense of what Blake was doing. So I typed out many of his poems and wrote them out by hand so I could feel his words through my body to see, is there anything, can I get anything from this? What does it feel like to write these words?
What did it feel like? Did you, I mean, that's a beautiful practice.
It felt foreign. Because I knew I was writing down what William Blake wrote. It wasn't what I wrote, but I could feel some kind of, I was quite young at the time, I could feel some kind of vague, inherent connection between the words that he was using that brought out his visions. There was some kind of connection. How he knew how to put this word next to that word, next to that word on the same line or on two lines, that was a matter of great study for me. But I could feel it in my body. So to go back to what William said, the poet thinks with the poem, and that in itself is the profundity. Think, in that sentence, for me, is not cognition. It's not a matter of intellection. Right? It's a matter of full body-mind intimacy with the act of writing. Now, doesn't that sound just like yoga? But doesn't that sound just like a meditation?
Yeah.
And so the way I approached writing, again, I just sort of stumbled into it, but it was. It was some way that the silence inside of me was expressing itself, is what I feel like saying now. It became a kind of meditative practice for me that included using my mind, included noticing the viscera, noticing what this body was doing while I was writing, and then struggling, endlessly struggling with the words on the page to figure out just where does this go? I don't know.
I mean, as you were talking, I was leaning into the word intimacy, like this deep, because I mean that's like, I think before we started, we talked about Michael Stone and the who we both knew, and he, for me, I mean, his work has kind of led me to you, but his work, he translated yoga as intimacy.
Oh.
Which really absolutely resonated with me, because I just went, oh God, that makes so much sense, because aren't we just in relationship with everything, and everything's in relationship with itself, and there's always this intimate touch between things, and we're just noticing them, right?
Yeah, we are noticing it. And when I talk about relationship, like with my Zen students, one of the things I've said to them is, we are not only in relationship, we are relationship. I am living relationship. And it took the total dynamic functioning of everything in the universe for me to constellate. So if you want to know what you're looking at here, you are looking at active relationship that is going on moment by moment by moment and changing moment by moment by moment, according to the way things that have made me up, both in my body and mind, and the way they're relating to each other and to the environment or conditions in which they find themselves. And so it seems to me that if we are in relationship, how in the world can we possibly know anything about our lives by looking at it from outside? The only way to really find out something about it is to be right in the heart of it, right in the center of it as completely as we can. And then we have a chance of knowing something about it. Now, before we started the podcast, you mentioned Dogen, Eihei Dogen, often known as the founder of Soto Zen Buddhism, and that's the practice of Zen that I do. I practice Dogen Zen, basically. And intimacy was crucial for Dogen. And in many of his teachings, he would say, you should study this intimately, or you should make an intimate study of this. So, and the word he used was shinsetsu or shinmitsu in Japanese, medieval Japanese. And what did he mean by that? He meant no gap. Intimacy means, and he would say it, not a hair's breadth gap between you and anything else. So to truly know something, you must become one with it. To truly know something, you can't allow there to be a gap and study it from the outside, because then all you're going to be seeing is your perception of it. And perception is partial and limited, you know, in the best of times. But if you become one with it, if you leave no gap, if you risk giving yourself completely, the poet thinks with the poem, and that in itself is the profundity, right? If you risk giving yourself completely to whatever it is, whether it's a yoga pose, cooking dinner, cutting carrots, whatever it is, you will know something else, and you will know it from the inside. So intimacy, in a way, for me, is being alive being alive as the inside of things. I don't want to say from, because that proposes a kind of dualism, but being alive as the inside of things themselves. Is it true? Can we really do that? Maybe. Have I had experiences, and have other people reported experiences where they would say, yeah, I think that's what happened? Yeah, I think people have. So there's some evidence that if there is any gap, it's negligible. But Dogen's sense of intimacy meant know things as they are in themselves. Be with things as they are in themselves. And my feeling about Dogen, and Dogen is very complicated. He's I told one of his primary translators, an old friend of mine, Kaz Tanahashi, that if I had only one book that I could have with me for the rest of my life, it would be Dogen. Many people find him incomprehensible because he uses words to undo your cognitive thinking. So it's very frustrating to people. But for some reason, there's a kind of intuitive knowing what I don't know when I read him that takes me back to my very roots in Zen. And even though I can't tell you necessarily what I understand, something's understood when I read Dogen, because his use of language breaks down lots of distance to what he's pointing to. But he is always insisting on intimacy. And so In Zen practice, in our Zen practice, we practice shikan taza. Shikan means just or nothing but. So no gap, right? Shikan taza. Shikan, so wholeheartedly, nothing but. Ta means to touch or to meet, and za means zazen, meditation. So wholeheartedly meet your zazen. Wholeheartedly cut your carrot. Wholeheartedly walk. Wholeheartedly breathe. Wholeheartedly do the cow pose, right? And then what's being expressed? Intimacy.
There's something really rich about this, because I think it just, from listening to you speak, it just sounds like, again, it's this layer of like you've found the counterculture, and you found the kind of that time, and it just kind of you melted into it. Like I was had a conversation a few podcasts back with Pamela Weiss, a beautiful Buddhist teacher, and in her book she talks about melting, as we melt into things. And it sounded like you just melted into that, and then it sounds like you found Dogen, and then you melted into that. Because
right.
If you saying, like, you being an author and you being like a player with words all of your life, there's one book I'm going to read and take with me, it's Dogen. It sounded like then there was another melting when you discovered his words.
Well, his life work is called Shobogenzo, Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, and I was greatly honored to be the associate and translation editor of Kaz Tanahashi's version of Shobogenzo, of Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, and my deep feeling about Dogen is that if we really understood and lived what he was teaching, which is non-separation. Non-separation is another way to talk about intimacy. If no gap, non-separation, right? If we really understood the non-separation of non-duality, doesn't mean that I'm not here in Canada and you're not there in the UK, but there seems to be a self and an other, but also there is not. If we really understood that, we would not have created the disaster, the catastrophe, and the devastation that we are living with now in the world. We would not create war. We would not create climate catastrophe. We would actually be living in the paradise and the miracle of what life is, instead of living in that which wants to destroy it. Because the idea of separation proposes a distance and a dualistic sense of self and other, whereby if we follow other teachings from other religious teachings, we can do whatever we want, we can dominate, right? We have dominion over the world, as opposed to realizing we are the world. That's a very different understanding. Dogen's teaching proposes you are the totality itself. Take care of this life in every form. So my body, take care of it. But your body also, I take care of it. The body of the woods and the forest, take care of it. Why? Because it is you. So it's I find Dogen very positive, very life-affirming, very loving, really. Mm-hmm. I was in a panel at Upaya Institute many years ago, maybe around 2010 or so, and wonderful people. Kaz Tanahashi was there, Roshi Joan Halifax was there, a writer, another friend, Natalie Goldberg was there, and in the panel, one after another at the beginning, everyone said, I don't understand Dogen, I don't understand Dogen, I don't understand Dogen, I don't understand Dogen, which, of course, right. It's hard to, quote, understand Dogen if you try to understand it in the usual way. But when it was my turn, I said, I don't completely understand my wife, but it doesn't keep me from loving her. And and I think Dogen is the love guru. And Natalie just burst out laughing. She said, no one has called Dogen the love guru. I said, but don't you think he really is? And, Natalie's such a great person. She said, I do think he really is. What a great way to talk about him. So it was a kind of confirmation that Dogen's vision and way and teaching were trying to bring us to one way to talk about it is intimacy, another is love. People don't use that word about Zen, but they're starting to now. Because people, we've been practicing in the West now for a while with Dogen Zen, and they're starting to experience what it's like to have no gap as much as possible. I want to jump to creativity for a minute because Frank O'Hara, the New York poet Frank O'Hara comes to mind. He said it this way. Frank O'Hara said, "The slightest loss of attention leads to death." Now, isn't that quite a statement? The slightest loss of attention leads to death. Any writer who's writing and suddenly loses their attention, the piece dies in their hand. The moment dies. Their contact with themselves dies. So something dies. But complete attention, if the loss of attention leads to death, what does complete attention lead to?
I mean, this is all really amazing. I mean, I think you're bringing me back to like the wind.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You're bringing me back to you in your forest, thinking, and I suppose this is my next question. Is like, there's you in your forest, there's me and you in the forest, right? We've gone for a walk, and then we feel that wind on our arm, and we feel the coolness of it. And like you said, it's just wind. It's the nature of it is wind. But we want to put that into language. And I suppose that's kind of like what I'm really interested in is that like there's intimacy right there.
Yes.
It's almost like there's the intimacy of the way that the wind has touched my body and I've realized it. And then there's the what's then the possibility of the intimacy with the imagination that creates the outcome of expressing that in a way that touches the intimacy of someone else.
Yes, it's brilliantly said, beautifully said. Ezra Pound, everybody's favorite great fascist, but nonetheless brilliant poet, Ezra Pound wrote, "I have tried to write paradise. Don't move. Let the wind speak. That is paradise." Isn't that great? I have tried to write paradise. Right? Don't move. Let the wind speak. That is paradise. That don't move. I mean, your podcast is still point, right? that don't move is crucial, right?
Yeah.
He said at some point. And what's so brilliant about what you just pointed out, Scott, is that when a writer, for example, but it could be a composer or a musician or a dancer or a sculptor, whatever the form of expression is, when that person disappears as a separate self and appears as the work itself, what usually accompanies that is an act of recognition inside of the person. Recognition, means again, and cognition, to know or to think, right? So they know again something. They've known it before, but they may not have known that they knew it. When they are so in touch with that recognition, that recognition inside of themselves, that it is the source of their expression. Someone far away in another time and another place reads those words, hears that music, sees the gesture of the dancer, and it makes possible that, let's call them the recipient, that person's act of recognition as well. So all I had to do was tell you about walking in the woods in a certain way when the wind blew, and you knew something about your life. Isn't that magical? You weren't there, and then you were. And that's what expression, that's what so-called creative expression can do. But it takes a kind of intimacy.
I think this is really powerful, because then this kind of draws me into like this side of you that is a writer, that kind of, that, you know, to a certain degree you have to wrestle with it, right? It's like you got to wrestle with, like, God, there's an emotion, there's something come up, now I've got to put it into, like you kind of write and you scribble and you write. But I think that idea of being quiet, kind of, and this is the beautiful thing of, like, which I've been leaning into. I've been writing haikus and poetry, and just discovered like wakas. Is it wakas? I think for the lot, is it the way that Dogen writes? It's haikus, the Japanese way, and
you're talking about
waka, yeah.
Yeah.
These kind of, like, so over the last couple of years, since the beginning of the pandemic, I've just discovered writing poetry, and this is why I'm like really fascinated in talking to people like yourself who have used, who are deeply experienced and wise in the use of contemplative practice to allow that which can't be named, that which can't be, like, words can't be given, to give voice to it. And I there's been a few poems I've gone, oh, where's that come from?
Right. Yeah.
And I've been more and more, like, you know, been deeply moved. Like, I'm deeply moved by words, and I can feel the resonance. I can imagine, you know, there's a really lovely story about one of my favourite poems, which you'll know, it's like Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. And right. I was like, that's just the mind. I mean, let the soft animal of your body love what it loves is, for me, just like one of the most beautifully written lines. And yet when you discover that was written for one of her students, mm-hmm. as a test to say, oh, this is how you write this certain style, and then she just bashed out Wild Geese. I'm like, you've got to a point where you can just kind of like throw out into the ocean, like, a poem like that. You've been sitting with, there's something deep within you which is able to voice something which is, like you said, that deeply intimate way of being able to land words, imagination. And I think this is what I'm trying to draw to. It's that point where it's the imagination bit. It's the mm-hmm. mind, because the mind is so malleable. It has to go, there's that. It's almost like the linker, right? The link between this is how it's written on the page and it's going to be received, and there's the experience. And your mind has to go, oh, like that.
And how do I, you know, I mean, there's the question, right? How to get said what must be said, how to say it. Yeah. So let's see if I can remember that while you were talking. One thing came to mind that's very important. Words are often given a very bad reputation, usually by people who don't really understand what the real potentiality in language is. And we're told words divide, words are not the thing itself. Well, we know words are not the thing itself. You know, they point to the thing. They're the finger pointing to the moon. They're not the moon itself. But sometimes they can be the moon. Now, how can words be the moon? I had this question about words because Zen is known as a tradition outside of scripture, outside of language. This goes way, way back to the story of the Buddha on Vulture Peak, when the Buddha was, I'm sure your listeners know this, but, the Buddha was giving a talk on Vulture Peak to his assembled Sangha, his community of either 12 or 1,200 or 12,000 or 12 trillion, who knows how many people were there, right? One day, and all he did was hold up a flower. And amongst all of the people there, only one of them, Mahakasyapa, smiled. He saw the flower. But he also saw the Buddha's mind in holding up the flower. And so the apocryphal story says, the Buddha said, I have the true mind, I have the true Dharma, the true mind of Nirvana. This I give to you, Mahakasyapa. Okay. Meanwhile, everyone else is writing down and saying, "Oh, the Buddha held up a flower. What does that mean? What's a flower?" Mahakasyapa actually saw what the whole gesture was, and so the idea that mind-to-mind transmission over between teacher and student, or between disciples together, is outside of language, is a ubiquitous understanding. This spreads everywhere, but this bothered me. And it bothered me because I thought it can't be that everything else in the universe is a Dharma gate to full realization, except words. Somehow words were left out. It's not in the DNA of realization. It made no sense to me. So I went to Mayuzumi Roshi, who was the founder of Zen Center Los Angeles, and who I knew and who I had practiced with, and had been very kind to me, always very kind to me over the years. And in fact, in my very first interview with him as a Zen master, we talked about poetry, which was quite nice. It turns out that we both loved the same Japanese poet. And so I said that to him. I posed the question to him, and I said, Roshi, it can't be that words are the only thing that's not a Dharma gate through which one can enter and have full realization. And he said, no, of course not. And then he said this amazing thing. He said, the thing to remember is the place from which the words come out from. Remember the place from which the words come out from. So there's from and from. Source. What is the place from which the words come out from? If it's in itself sort of not formed or fairly truncated, the source is a little shaky. But the words come out from a source that is authentic and true and in touch with reality. Then you'll be able to feel the wind in someone's poem, because they're connected to the source. And so, in my understanding of writing, it's that willingness to leave all of my preoccupations aside and simply enter, if I can. I make no great claims, but if I can, enter the actuality of things in the form of wind or water or rain, or maybe it's the sound of a bus, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, so that the source, my experience in the source place is so authentic that my expression will carry that over to someone else. There was a poet named Charles Olson, very active and important poet in the United States. And what Olson said was, what our task as poets is to go from the source through the vehicle of the poem all the way over to the reader without loss of the energy found at the source. So that it's a direct transfer of energy through the vehicle of language. So we go from the non-language, ineffable world through language, and the person reads it, they read the language, and they have non-language. They have the energy found. Isn't that lovely?
That's a beautiful way of looking at it.
It's absolutely gorgeous. So I go from the sound of water through words And if I've done my job as I understand it, my reader hears the sound of water.
That is
I mean, do we need more?
you just stunned me with that. It's that's amazing. That's beautiful.
And it's what happens, doesn't it? So we know it can happen. We know that language has the ability to carry the ineffable world
Yeah.
across to that astounding mystery called someone else. So this mystery and that mystery find each other in the poem, or in the music, or in the dance, or
Yeah. So this is the thing, right? So this is the beautiful thing about what you're talking about, because I think when we're looking at the creative process, it's any way we can share something that comes from that source, right?
Yeah.
And touches someone in the same way, through dance, through art, through film, through all that kind of thing. And so we're not just, we can, with your particular way of living, of being, it's through words, but someone else could do it through through creative expression, right? It's just the way that we, as this entity, as this human experience, wants to share. There is a process. This is the process of doing that.
Yeah. I think that's right. And it takes allowing oneself to be subsumed into the activity. So there isn't someone doing poetry. There's poetry. There isn't someone doing yoga. Of course, someone is doing yoga. There's yoga. There isn't someone making dinner. There's dinner. Now, if you look at what the dinner is, or the yoga, or the poetry, somebody has done something. That's true. But in the end, to be able to translate that pure experience as pure as possible, it sounds like I'm talking about only absolutes, but I'm understanding that we're human beings doing this, so I'm not pretending that some kind of super God activity is going on here. But human beings have this capacity. We know it because we're moved by things. We're touched by things. We find ourselves through someone else's expression. Now, isn't that amazing? You say, wait, you don't know me. Not only that, you lived 1,300 years ago in China. Oh, yes, I know you. Why? Because of non-separation.
I remember in lockdown sitting in the fields early before I started my classes, and it was the most beautiful time because to be in lockdown, I lived in the countryside, and so I was able to go out, and it was springtime in the UK, and no one could go out anywhere, a bit like probably you lot, and I'd just go and sit in the fields at 5:45, 5:45. Sun was just coming up, and all you could hear were the birds.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I just started writing poetry myself, right? And I thought to myself, is this the way I sing? Is this the way I sing? Is this the way that my birdness, my chirping like a birdness, is this the natural nature of the way that it's coming, my voice is this coming through me? And it felt a really beautiful way of looking and thinking just about how the birds are calling. We call it the bird call, right? The morning morning chorus. And I was thinking, what is the way that I wake up the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I had that kind of realization around the nature of birds. They just sing, they just use that's what they do. And I say, well, what if I got out of the way, what would be my expression?
Mm-hmm. It's you're talking like this is bringing back a very strong and very good memory. There was another poet named Ted Berrigan, wonderful poet, died far too young, who I knew when I was a young writer, and he was teaching a course, And it was at the time that various scientists, etc., were talking about sort of the functionality of things. So, Konrad Lorenz and the ducks following, whoever they saw first or something like that. And he one day Ted said, "You want to know why birds sing? Here's I'm going to tell you the secret. It's not in this book." He said, "Trees tree, water waters, birds sing. Not to get anything. It is what they are. Bird is bird song, just like bird is flight and bird is air, because you can't separate the bird from its life or any of its elements." And to ask the question, not what can I do, but in what way can what my nature is express itself, is actually a radical thought and a revolutionary act if you do it. Because it takes functionality out of the picture and replaces it with pure expression of one's nature. Trees don't grow leaves to accomplish anything. Water isn't wet to accomplish something. It's their nature expressing itself, and each thing has its own nature. We have our own nature. The problem is that we live at a distance from our nature. Because we live at a distance from our nature, we destroy. Because we don't know what we or anything else is. This goes back to what I was talking about with Dogen. So to have a practice where one's own nature is being expressed, and I won't get into all the fancy kind of Buddhist stuff and talk about Buddha nature, and it's not important at this moment. But to practice being the leaf growing on a tree in human form is perhaps maybe the fullest expression of what it is we are that I can think of. We speak about who am I, but I think that's a mistake. It's too androcentric. It puts personhood above everything. But long before there was person, there was what? What am I? Am I wind? I am wind. Am I clouds? I am clouds. Am I rain? I am rain. If there's time, I'm time. If there's space, I'm space. Thich Nhat Hanh was a very, very, very good teacher. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a very, very good teacher about the whatness of what we are. And if we explore what am I, and really look at it very, very deeply, instead of focusing on the personality self, the who am I, we can enter reality in a way that's unusual, and I feel quite essential for a human being to know what it is they actually are, and then to function in the world in that way. Because if we really think about ourselves, Scott, it took the whole total dynamic functioning of all things through all space and time for you to constellate as you. Everything had to function for you to be you. And so all that functioning is right there in you. Can we touch that? I think we can. And we do it through meditation. We do it through art. We do it through yoga. These practices connect us to the source that is always just right here.
This starts to make sense. When you get those artists and those creators who are just so immersed in their art. Quite often you hear people say, "Oh, that's not meditation." I mean, well, this is this. They say this is my meditation. My running is my meditation. That kind of thing. But I think what you're pointing to really profoundly, I think you're speaking to this sense of nature. What is the nature? What is the thing that is, if you got out of the way, wants to be expressed through us. And do you feel that everyone has that in them?
Everyone is that.
Everyone is that.
Everyone is it. The question is how to stop living in a way that emphasizes not knowing who we are, not knowing what we are. The culture wants us to follow the culture's agenda. Knowing what we are is not necessarily. They won't necessarily sell more refrigerators. Right? So that's why what I said to you is that this is a radical idea and a revolutionary act if it's put into your life, and if you live it as your life. Everyone is this. There's no special people. Sometimes when my students give a talk, they're worried, and I always say to them, I invited the important people, but none of them were available, so it's just going to be us. so, and then they relax a little. But, yes, it is what we are. There's no separate thing that made me from what made you.
So there's this beautiful understanding that we are creativity. Like right now, we're creating this.
That's right.
And right now, someone walking down the street is creating the next step.
Right.
And so this is the thing about, I think, practice and meditation, these contemplative ways. They stop and they go, no, just look at what you are. And then that kind of, maybe this is the fourth foundation of mindfulness, the dharmas of the dharmas, is about how you then move once you realise that you are a body, you have a mind and your feelings. Now, what do you do with that?
Yeah. You have them.
You are them.
Yeah, I don't think you are them. I think.
Okay.
I think you have them. They are not. That which gives rise to themselves. They come from what I was calling the total dynamic functioning of all things through time, through space and time. They come from, in Buddhism, it's called emptiness or boundlessness. They rise from Buddha nature, but I don't think we should.
This is I get you, totally. But I'm really starting to get you. I'm really starting to get just talking to you is just I really get to the sense of where this is coming, where it's coming from. You're not getting a sense of where it's coming from. I get the feel of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And when you talk about is that why you wrote your book, which is the reason you're here, is the finger pointing at the moon. I keep getting good. Is it finger pointing at the moon or finger painting at the moon?
I was very aware. We're very aware of it, and hoping that people would realize that if you finger paint on the moon, the finger will no longer just be pointing at the moon. That finger painting on the moon means you're the moon, and you're on the moon. You're not looking at it from a great distance. But I just want to go back to something that you said about creativity. It's very important that we are creators. In the Western tradition, Western religious tradition, Judeo-Christian tradition, it's very clear. It says we're born right in the image of the Creator. So what does that mean? That we're a picture of a Creator? For me, what it means is that we are creators. That in fact it is our birthright. And I've said it in Finger Painting on the Moon. It is our birthright. It is our nature to create. We think about it physically as procreation. So procreation means what? You have more babies or something like that. Every act is procreative. There isn't anything How do I know? Because it's never been done before. And it's never been done in that way before. You know, there's this horrible phrase in English now, right? Been there, done that, right? You say, oh, do you want to go to London? Oh, been there, done that. Well, you haven't been there this time. You haven't done that this time. That time was that time. If that's good enough, you bring it over here. I want to look at it. Nobody can, because it's gone.
Yeah.
So every moment is an opportunity for the creative expression in our lives, and we are in fact creating every single moment because it's our nature. Our heart beats, our diaphragm helps us breathe, the mind thinks, and all of that is part of the creation of this moment. What will you do at this moment? Right? You know what Mary Oliver asks, right? What will you do? What will you do? You who are the totality of things, what will you do?
What will you do with this one precious life?
That's right. What will you do? So this, once we're in touch with that, with realizing, wow, the whole thing is right here. It's not up to some little tiny me. Actually, everything is here, and I can use it to help in this world where there's so much trouble. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. And so in Buddhism, you know, some of us take vows and precepts to help us express this wholeness that everyone is. Where did it come from? Where can I get it? You don't get it. You're it. It's over. Problem solved. You know.
Oh my God, I could talk to you for hours.
Well, we're doing okay. You know, I used to tell my poetry students, you don't have to make it up. It's up. It's just for you to see it. It's already up. Now when you touch it, you will shade it in a way that only you could in that moment. Tomorrow, you will do it differently. It's constant creation.
It is. Oh, wow. I'm just like stuck for words. It's just like, oh, this is beautiful. I could go on forever. I think, you know, as we tie it up, I think I'm going to tie it, but I think there's definitely a part two. Goodness gracious me, not coming. But
I didn't hear that. Say it again.
I think as we tie this up, because I could talk to you for hours, but like I think but I was going to say there's definitely a part two somewhere along the line.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm having such a lovely time. I wanted to just I kind of leave with the question, like with all of this, like you're 55 years of practice, like what has it taught you?
Well, I hope it's taught me to love better. That's really what is in my heart, is to love in whatever form I can. I've loved imperfectly, without question. Sometimes a little better, sometimes a little worse. I mean, you know, but if this may be some kind of weird, immodest thing, but at least knowing something of what I am, it really does come down to life, loving and affirming life in every form it encounters itself. Now, I don't know if that sounds too vague, but I do mean that. I am life, affirming life, and I encounter life in everything. How to to truly affirm that life everywhere. Feels like what I was in some way made to do. But I don't just mean me. I mean, to get a little strange about this, what is the function of DNA? The function of DNA is to reproduce itself. That's us. But not reproduce our, all my bad habits, but life, continuing life, according to whatever the coding is. That's what it helps do. We are so big that to use life as it's been given is my own feeling. To diminish life, to constrict or constrain life, to end life, seems like moving against everything that made it possible for me to be alive. So I choose not to do that. If I've learned anything, it's that this life is precious and I should use it for life. Period.
Beautiful. Peter, thank you.
Yeah,
I normally have one last question, which is, I don't know if you answered it then, but I'd like you to have a go. What does it mean to live a contemplative life?
Thank you.
What does it mean? One more question.
Yeah.
What does it mean to live a contemplative life?
Did you get it? Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm going to leave that in.
Well, it's so sweet to talk with you. I enjoyed myself so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here.